Hey, welcome to Unshackled with Tash. Hope you've enjoyed the last few episodes, and I hope that they're all helping and making some sense as to why we do what we do. I have, like I said, have loved being on this journey, and sharing this information is something that I just really love doing. So let's talk about today's topic. And what we're going to talk about is what we call the three brains and our three motivations. Now, you're probably thinking, three brains, we don't have three brains. Well, we actually do. And there are so many versions to this, but the one I'm going to give you today is we have a reptilian brain, we have the mammalian brain, and we have the neocortex. And I will go further into detail with those. And I think I've covered some of the brain in the previous episode. But today, the reason that this is so important, guys, is to understand what part of your brain you're utilizing when you are in what they call a looping state. Now, do you know what that means? It's like when you have a thought and you just keep looping and ruminating and getting yourself so worked up over a particular thought. And what that is using the reptilian brain, which is the survival brain, which is the amygdala. It's the dinosaur brain. It's what we used in caveman days, right? And it once you start this thought process and you can't let this looping go, this brain just goes into overdrive, right? So there's lots of cortisol, lots of adrenaline, and just lots of stress, right? Now, you know yourself. It's just one thought, right? You could have a million other things that were positive about this particular situation, scenario, topic, whatever. But this one thought you just can't let go. So you ruminate, you go over and over and over. And what happens is there are so many neurochemicals that are all working for this looping, right? There's millions of neurochemicals, and they get stuck on a particular thought. And what happens is your brain then instinctually looks for evidence to support that thought, that looping thought. So then that looping thought and that process is stronger and stronger. And some days you think you're crazy. Some days you're like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I get rid of this? And the reason you can't get rid of it is because you haven't been able to break the state, right? And when we are stuck in a particular thought, belief, habit, process, anything like that, it gathers momentum. It gathers so much momentum. And, we'll use the example of self-doubt, right? Once you start to question your capability of something, or somebody likes you or doesn't like you, or the relationship's going good or not, or you're going to get that job or not, or whatever it is, right? You start the story of self-doubt. And remember, I said in the first week, the stories that we tell ourselves, we then look for belief, and then we look for more and more evidence to support that belief. So when you are sabotaging and looking for all the evidence to support that this belief that you are, worthless, useless, not smart enough, things like that, you will gather so much momentum that you will actually believe it. And your adrenaline and your cortisol, it will be so high that your brain actually can't function properly. And this is a proven fact. This is research. When your brain is stressed, it only works at 50% capacity. And the problem is you are not making rational decisions. You are not thinking straight. And so what I try to help people do is break that state. Like when you are looping and looping and looping, no matter what the thought is, because remember, we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day, and 90% of those are subconscious, autopilot. So your brain is going to go there. It is going to go there 100%. So what we need to do is break the state, and we have a process for that. And once we break that state, it actually floods your brain with gratitude, serotonin, endorphins, oxytocin, nitrous oxide, dopamine. We've got to get oxygen to the brain. We have to re-oxygenate the brain when we're in this looping state, right? And once, this is all part of the work I do, and I know there's a lot of other coaches that do this. Breaking the state helps reduce the stress, helps reduce the adrenaline, helps reduce the cortisol, takes you out of fight or flight, because that's where you are. You're in fight, flight, fawn or freeze, because you cannot function on that level. So that's what we do with looping states. But there's, like I said, it just takes one small thought that takes you on this crazy looping scenario, and just picture this little dot, and then it's in a circle, and then you scribble around it like a child, and it goes in all different angles and areas and covers all different diameters of that circle and page. That's what's happening in your brain. That's why we have to help stop the looping process. And the other thing is, as I said, it floods your system with adrenaline and cortisol, which is so not good for you. The other thing I was going to mention is, when we are in that state, we are at what they call low vibration. So you will pull in low vibrational thoughts, stories, beliefs. You will ring all your low vibrational friends to help support you in that state. Whereas if you rang somebody that's done the work or doing the work, they'd be able to help you step up. But because you need all the evidence to support your belief system, you will look for low vibrational people and situations and scenarios to help you on that. Your next brain that we've got is the mammalian brain. And the mammalian brain controls all neurochemical emotions, hormones, moods, etc. It is also the brain that gauges social ranking. Now, isn't that interesting, right? When you walk into a room and you just know you're going to connect with particular people, or you avoid particular people, or you're too embarrassed or shy to go over to a bunch of people because you think they're better than you. That part of the brain is the part that helps you work out that ranking socially. It houses the limbic system. And the limbic system is all about emotions, hormones, moods, and connection. What happens when you go into a room with all these people? You go into a default, right? Even though you have no evidence to support that person's better than you, or you're better than that person, or they're not, they don't look friendly, they don't look nice. It's our default to go in and make assumptions and use our belief system and our filter, our lens, our map of the world to make a decision on that, right? But what's happening is you actually start to fall into old patterns, right? You'll go and drink because that will cover the discomfort of how you're feeling about these particular people or this situation. Or you'll overspeak, you'll tell too much, or you'll start being the clown or the joker because that's your default, right? Or you'll start to, pull away or even leave. But often people will drink or they will try to fit in so that they feel like they belong. That's what we do in social settings when we're working from that brain. And our next brain is the CEO, which is the neocortex. That's the one that runs the show. The neocortex is the thinking brain. It's the logical thinking. It's the complex reasoning. And it's the only part of the brain that creates new thoughts. And until you start using this part of your brain, you will stay in the top two, which is the reptilian and the mammalian. And the neocortex is where we create new synapses, new neural pathways. We don't go into the emotional brain. We start to go into that 10% of conscious thinking where you think, okay, this isn't real. The fear isn't real. It's just an old story I've got running, or an old trauma that I've gone through. Or I actually have no evidence that person doesn't like me, or saying something about me, or I'm not going to get that job, or whatever story you've got running. The thinking and logical brain starts to change the programming, starts to change the patterning. But until you do that, until you consciously make the decision to do that, you will stay in those two top brains. I spent most of my life there. Until these last few years, I have always functioned from the reptilian and the mammalian because I had a trauma upbringing. And when the brain is exposed, like most people's are that have been through a lot of trauma or grew up in a lot of stress and a lot of dysfunction, your body is in constant stress, right? And if something major or catastrophic or big happens later in life, then your brain just cannot cope anymore with that amount of stress. Have you ever heard of that saying, they flipped their lid, right? What that means is that amount of stress became so much that the brain has a cover on it. So say your thumb is the amygdala, and then the cover over that is the neocortex, the CEO, which is the hand that covers over the thumb. So just picture my thumb curled in my hand and rolled over. Each time you are getting stressed, each time that stress exacerbates, each time another day goes by where you're under stress, imagine those fingers lifting, right? And then one day the whole hand lifts. That means your brain is exposed. That means that you don't have that cover. You are not rational. And as I said, that amount of stress takes away 50% of the capacity for your brain to work. And then it takes, I think, and I stand corrected by anyone that wants to check this, I think it says it takes up to 7 days for the brain to recover. And I'm sure, rest in peace, beautiful Kerwin Ray, he did a great video on that. It can take a long time for your brain to recover from that amount of stress constantly. And you know, this is something I really do want to cover. When someone is that stressed and when someone is that exposed and they're not rational and they're not logic thinking, we take things that they do and say very, very personal. And they're not even aware most of the time that they're in that heightened state because it's become such a regular state for them. But when you actually start to understand and do this work, you recognize that people that have, have taken out on people stuff that they've been exposed to or things that have happened to them. It's not until you do this work that you recognize what you've done to people, what you've said, what you've put people through. And when you can own that and when you can be accountable, that's part of the healing process. And, you know, I was one of the biggest judgment person in the ambulance service when it came to people that were stressed and, you know, wanted to attempt suicide and things like that. And this was one of the biggest lessons for me going through what I've went through, because the problem is when your brain is that exposed to stress and there is no off switch, which often happens, well, actually always happens with post-traumatic stress and complex post-traumatic stress, your brain never switches off. Your stress response is never switched off, so it just keeps going and going and going. And when someone makes that decision, they're not thinking about all the other people. They're not thinking about the loss for other, like families and kids and things like that. They actually don't have the capacity to logically think, oh my God, this is going to affect them. This is going to be doing this is that. And I'm not making excuses for people. I'm trying to give people some understanding as to why people end up doing what they're doing, okay? And I remember a beautiful boss of mine used to say this, and he used to say, such high levels of stress that cause somebody to make the decision to end their life is sad because it is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. But this is the problem. People don't speak. People don't have the capacity, or they don't have the safe space to say, hey, I'm in trouble. You know, I need help, because people feel weak to be vulnerable. Whereas vulnerability is one of the most, it takes a lot of strength. It's one of the most amazing things someone can do for themselves. And it is strength, and it is courage, and it is brave to be vulnerable. And, you know, it's such a sad thing when people don't have the tools or the strategies. And like I said, that's what this is all about for me. It's helping people understand why they do what they do. And I'm not going to go into complete depth of everything, because that's not what this is about. That's, you know, I'm happy to help people with all of this outside of the podcast, but this podcast is about helping people understand, you know, why they do what they do at a very basic level, so there's some understanding. I know there's going to be people out there that know that, you know, there's a lot more to this, and yes, I know that, but I'm making this very simple for people to understand. One of the things that I try to help people with too is, if you decide to go on this path and you decide to do the work and heal yourself and, you know, help your family improve, and generational patterns and programs and conditioning, you've got to have a really good reason why, guys. You've got to have a really good reason why, because your reason why has to be so strong that the two top brains, the reptilian and the mammalian, don't take over. You need to have such a strong reason why that the neocortex, the CEO, the logical thinking brain takes over. The conscious brain that says, no, we're not doing that. We're doing this because that didn't get us anywhere last time. And my reason why, everybody knows this that knows me, my reason why is my children and my grandchildren. And my kids were handed a pretty shitty blueprint, and my kids were handed, you know, a lot of intergenerational trauma. And my promise to myself and to my children, and I'm following through, and I know that I'm doing really well with this, is we are breaking those patterns. We are breaking that cycle. We are healing ancestral wounds and family trauma and our lineage. So My reason why is my children and I want to leave a legacy. And again, I know there's a lot of people out there on this journey, and I wish every one of them the absolute best. But yeah, your why needs to be so strong that any negative belief doesn't take you back to a default. Yes, you're going to have days where you question what you're doing and are you doing the right thing and things like that. But you need to have a purpose and a passion. Otherwise, you'll quit. And you know what? There has been times I've wanted to quit, 100%. But I look at my kids and I look at how far I've come, and I've looked at the effect it's having on them. And, like I said, hasn't all been easy. Actually, it hasn't been easy at all. But what I have showed them and what we have done to date is life-changing. Absolutely life-changing. So the last little section I want to go on, and it is just such a short section, but it will explain to you why you do some of these things. And that is the 3 levels of motivation, okay? And there's survival. Survival will always trump, okay? Survival is life or death. And it's caveman days again, okay? This is where the motivation of staying in a job that we don't like to pay the bills, the fear of no money, not belonging, not having anything, staying in relationships for too long, even though you know that it's unhealthy, it's narcissistic, it's toxic, you're giving more than you're getting. It's just not a beautiful, healthy, loving relationship. But you stay because the fear of being alone is greater than being in a relationship that is not serving you and is not giving you what you deserve. The bare minimum is what you're getting. And, it's the old codependent relationship. You would rather stay in a relationship because, one, you don't want to go through a breakup because of financial situations. You don't want to go through a breakup because you don't want to be alone and go on the dating sites again. You don't want to be alone because you won't be invited to anything, and then you lose half your friends, you lose half of everything. Been there, done it. But this is the thing, guys. That is the motivation of survival, okay? And that's that old staying in a familiar hell rather than going to an unfamiliar heaven. Now, there's reasons we do that, which I will probably talk about in the next section, and that is our core needs. So there's a reason we do this. But that is just a couple of examples, staying in jobs that they use you. They ask you to do extra hours but don't pay you. They expect you to just, do it because they asked. But you're so afraid to stand up for yourself and set those boundaries because you're afraid of losing your job. But you're actually abandoning yourself. You're actually giving them pieces of you that you don't even give to yourself, okay? The next one is carrot and stick, and that is external motivation, which is rewards and punishment. So, for example, bribing your children, right? You say to them, if you have your dinner, then you can have ice cream, okay? So they're thinking, oh, cool, okay, if I eat, I'll get something good, okay? The other one is people pleasing, always looking for external reward or punishment. So, people pleasing is being there for everybody and not expecting, but knowing that that's going to help someone, so that gets that validation and significance for you. So that's the reward. But then there's that other one of where, oh my God, if I don't do that, if I don't turn up, if I don't if I don't cook dinner, or if I don't wash up, or if I don't clean the house, there's punishment, right? So the motivation to clean the house is because, oh my God, if I don't clean the house, he's going to go off or she's going to go off when they get home. Or if I cook dinner and I make sure everything's done before they get home and we can maybe have a beautiful night together, there's the reward. This is that carrot and stick, okay? That's external motivation. And the next one, the thing I want to say, this is where if your why isn't strong enough, you will work again between the survival motivation and the carrot and stick motivation. So remember, survival is life or death, staying in a familiar hell rather than going to an unfamiliar heaven, because the fear of not knowing is scarier than what you already know. So a lot of people settle. And the carrot and stick is the reward and punishment. So it's that give and take, push and pull. If I do this, they'll do that. If I don't do this, they'll do that. You know, it's unhealthy, but that's how most people function. And then the next one is the intrinsic, and this comes from your why, okay? If you hit hurdles and if you have some challenges, that's not going to stop you from doing what it is that you need to do. None of this survival, none of this carrot and stick. This is you're working from love, not fear. The top two are working from fear, okay? There's fear and anxiety and uncertainty. Intrinsic is you get back up and you do not go back to any default behavior. So intrinsic is what we need or would love for people to get to, so that they're not sitting in this reward and punishment or this survival and just settling and making do. And, I guess what I want you to do is ask yourself, which level do I operate from the most? It's like these relationships where they don't tell each other particular things because I don't tell him that because he'll get the shits, or I haven't told her that because that's going to annoy her. Like, that is not healthy. And I've been there, done it. I wish, like I've said before, that this was all taught at school a long time ago, because this could save a lot of friendships, relationships, marriages. It could change your work situations, but it doesn't. We're all driven by fear. Start to be driven by your passion, your love, why you want to change, why it is that you want to do this work, and what brings you to that stage in your life where you say, enough is enough. I'm going to make this work for me. I'm not going to abandon myself anymore. I'm going to show my kids, my family, my partner, whatever, but I'm going to show myself how important I am. How much am I going to start stepping up for myself? And like I said in the last few weeks, it's the self-love, it's the self-awareness, it's the blueprint. Remember where this came from. This wasn't done overnight. It's been with you since childhood. And as children, you have always done the reward and punishment, because that's how it works. So I hope that's all made a bit of sense. I'm more than happy for people to ask me questions, and I'm happy to answer it and, help you with some more stuff. As I've said, if you want to keep following me, subscribe and follow, and you will get notifications every week that a new episode is dropped. But I'm going to keep giving you new tools, new strategies, new understanding each week. And I look forward to speaking to you all next week.